Welcome to Politically Basic. I'm your host, Kyle Campbell. On today's show, we are talking politics and faith. And I'm so honored to have with me Chad Connelly. Chad is just an incredible human. He's the founder of an organization called Faith Wins, a true political insider in the worlds of major political campaigns, engaging churches and people of faith in elections. Chad was the Republican National Committee's first ever National Director of Faith Engagement. And during 2 terms as the chairman of the South Carolina Republican Party, Chad set new fundraising records for the party, hosted 2 nationally televised debates, and also held the largest presidential preference primary at that time in South Carolina's history, with over 607,000 voting in the election. In the last 10 years, he's traveled to more than 43 states and spoken to over 82,000 pastors and faith leaders about the importance of pastoral leadership in the public arena. His work has led to trusted relationships with a ton of denominational and organizational ministry leaders across the nation, resulting in the highest evangelical turnout and vote in modern political history in the 2016 elections. Welcome, Chad. Thank you so much for being with me on the show today.
Kyle, the honor is mine. You are awesome and you're very sweet. And I wish you guys well out there on the left coast. I can't wait to see you.
Hey, now.
I'm honored to be on.
Well, you're the sweetest. And listen, everybody knows Chad Connelly, and Chad Connelly knows everybody. You are the most well-known human in the faith and political arenas, in making those connections and knowing pastors, knowing faith leaders. You're a valuable guy over there, especially when it comes to a presidential election. So tell our listeners what's going on with Faith Wins. This is the organization that you founded and you're running currently. What are you guys up to, especially in this year with this wild and crazy presidential election upon us?
Wild and crazy is 100% accurate. And you know, Kyle, I just, as a Christian first, who's a conservative because conservative principles work, foundations matter. And of course, having worked for the Republican Party and been a state party chairman, been affiliated with the party, but now running Faith Wins as a 501c3 nonprofit, it is just my great desire that Christian votes and voices be heard and felt. I've been blessed, from a little tiny town. I've told you before, probably 500 or 600 counting the animals, one traffic light, and sometimes there's cars there. To have been in the meetings I've been in, it's just been a God thing. And, I really think the Lord let me do politics at the highest level to see what works. And as a Christian first, I've been in too many meetings where the political consulting class, they're exasperated. They don't know how to deal with the faith vote, and they want to co-opt to control the faith vote. So I started Faith Wins just as a God thing to go out and maximize not just votes, but voices. And let's face it, there's not too much biblical faith being shown out in the public arena these days, and we need to change it.
Yeah. Well, I love that you're doing that, and you've been so tremendously effective. I'm really glad that we're talking about the convergence of these 2 worlds today, Chad, because for years, especially in the beginning, the founding of America, religion and faith played the main role in most people's lives. If you go and look at our founders and the men who wrote our founding documents, their main influence was the Bible. We had leaders of our educational institutions, Princeton, Yale, Harvard. They were pastors. These were men of faith. And so those 2 worlds were intertwined so much, and we've really gotten very far away from that. There used to be an election day sermon given before election day for that purpose, to educate congregations about our civic duty and what's going on in our counties, states, and nations, to equip and prepare people to vote biblically and accurately to their values. We've really drifted. Bigly drifted from this in our culture today. Church attendance, that's just fallen from 38% down to 30% now. We haven't recovered that in-person church attendance since pre-pandemic days. So the work that you're doing is so important. And I love hearing from you because I think that people don't quite understand that we are still a nation of believers. And the most recent data shows this. We've got 3/4 of Americans saying they are of a religious faith, and 68% of people saying they're Christian. So why do we drift, do you think, and what do we do at this point in time? I know I'm lobbing some like really big major questions your way, but it's interesting to look back and see kind of where we have been in the past as a nation and where we are today in terms of talking politics and religion.
It's a big question. It was our friend David Barton's books in the 1990s that helped turn me onto this. I'd come out of college, married my college sweetheart, went in the Army. Kyle, I'd never had anybody question my faith and my patriotism. I
Right.
just assumed it. When I first read that Understanding the Times by Dr. David Noble of Summit Ministries, comparing humanism, communism, socialism with Christianity, and I realized we have a responsibility. And then I started reading David Barton's books. You've read all the stuff too, Original
Mm-hmm.
Intent, all the stories of the founders. It's so rich in information that we've lost. And you realize that we've done a poor job. We're to occupy till the Lord comes, and we've not done our part. Part of it is certainly the education systems watered down the
Mm-hmm.
truth, suppress the truth, lie about the truth. And so when you read those documented stories, and I know you've been to Wall Builders
Mm-hmm.
Museum, when you hold Bibles that the founders took notes in and prayed to Jesus, their Savior, you realize this narrative out there that they were deists is not true. And you see how hard someone has worked to remove those truths. And while we've always lived in a pluralistic society, I believe that it's important that there be an anchor, a foundation. And even when people are confused about that stuff, they're looking for something solid. And I don't know if you ever read Francis Schaeffer's book, The Christian Manifesto. I just finished rereading it. But he said, what happens is people put self on the throne,
Mm-hmm.
and the only person that belongs on the throne in our lives is God above. And when we put self on the throne, the way this humanism, communism, leftism, whatever comes in, is people figure out, boy, I don't have all the answers and I shouldn't be on the throne. Well, that ought to make us hit our knees in faith and look to God above as the one who has the answers. But instead, they put the state on the throne.
Mm-hmm.
And Schaeffer said in 1971, the biggest threat to Christianity in the next generation would be statism.
Wow.
Statism. And then when I tied all that together, I realized this is our fault. What can I do about it? Number one, I got to get informed. I need to read some truths. As you know, you can go on the Church Finds Its Voice website, our Faith Wins website, get an entire list of history books. I've read over 100 books about George Washington. I don't know how many hundreds of books I've read about American Christian history and God's role. Got to get back to that.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting. We're not hearing that terminology, stateism, but that's
Yeah.
really what's happening. And we talk so much about the pandemic and what happened prior and what happened after, but it really was such a pivotal point in time for our country in a number of ways. But for people of faith, especially, particularly, the vast majority of people who were attending church in person pre-pandemic, this was a really
Yeah.
this was a game changer. And we haven't gotten back from that. And even before that, though, we were starting to see a little bit of a cultural shift. And I want your take on this to a more gentle, less feeling of being judgmental, maybe more seeker friendly church experience. And we're sort of now coming up into this time where we're having a clash a little bit between disengagement and a time of revival. Like we are seeing it. We are seeing it powerfully. What do you think the state of the church is today in 2024?
God's church, I think, is growing, and you can't kill Jesus's growth. You can't. Now, it moves around sometimes, and I think what we're seeing is a sifting, Kyle.
Mm.
I think God's sifting his church. We all saw what's been going on with the United Methodist Church. I grew up in a little Methodist church in the country, and hundreds of churches are leaving the UMC internationally because they've capitulated on truth. And we've got to go back to what is truth, and not little t truths, my truth, your truth. There's just one truth. That's big capital T truth. That's God's truth. And it has to be an anchor and a foundation and something. And when people decide, well, that's not my truth, and what they really mean is it's not my experience. But I believe I'm in churches every week. In fact, I told somebody on one of the campaign team just the other day, if you know somebody who's been in more churches with more pastors in more denominations in the past 60, 90, 10 years, whatever, 60, 90 days, about 3 months, whatever, please introduce them to me. And so I feel like I got a pretty good finger on the pulse of what's happening. The people who are teaching truth, the pastors who are teaching truth are growing. The churches who are trying to weave their way around, well, the Bible's got some good stories, but that's not all true. And they're apologizing for God's word, which is a dangerous place to be. And I know scripture, Matthew 5:13-16, Jesus commands us to be salt and light. And it's very clear. And he says, if the salt has lost its savor, has lost its flavor, it's good for nothing to be thrown in the street and trodden before the feet of men. Now, I don't know about you, that sounds like a bad day for the Lord to tell me you're good for nothing. And when we don't engage the culture, I think we need to do a real reflection of our lives and go, okay, Lord, what am I supposed to do? I did a Christian radio show yesterday, and they said, what do you mean? I said, look, some people are called to be the Little League coach. Go be an influence in those kids' lives. Some of y'all are called to teach Sunday school. I've taught a Sunday school class for 25, 26 years in my little Baptist church in Newberry. What are you called to do to make a difference in this world, to be the hands and feet of Christ? I think we got to get back to a time where we as Christians are not just inside the four walls, but we are out engaging this culture. You think about the craziness. I was with 71 pastors in Orlando 2 days ago. Flew down the night before and flew back that night. A lot of delays, weather and all that. But I had such an awesome time, Kyle. It was multi-ethnic. There were probably 30% of the pastors were minority pastors, and we had great exchange and feedback. And we had this very same conversation. And they said that their members are noticing we have lost common sense. And I like that. But what it really means, too, is we've lost biblical sense. And a lot of people today don't even know what that means. But you're right. Barna still says there's about 80 to 82 million people sitting in churches, and only 32 to 33 million vote in a major election. And all I know is when I see adults having these supposedly intellectual conversations about who gets to go to what bathroom, for instance,
right.
Or, you got little girls. I've got 2 girls. I don't want my girls competing against biological males. To me, that's common sense. But there are people that are trying to intellectualize that. And so we're paying attention to feelings now instead of truth. And we got to get back to a time when somebody's willing to tell the truth. I told those pastors in Orlando, the first time somebody in the school board, and as you and I know, it happened in Houston, Texas, said, wouldn't it be a great idea if we let boys who feel like girls go to the bathroom? Now, I don't know any details, Kyle, but here's what I know. There wasn't a Christian in the room with a backbone to stand up and say that's nonsense. That's dangerous. And it's gone over the country. And now there's an entire political party that stands on that, what they believe. Right. Let them go to the bathroom. Forget the little girls. Let these men wrestle, run, race, swim against girls who've spent their lives working to earn a spot. That's not common sense. And so I think that this progressivism that's gone so far will snap back. But I believe a lot of people may identify that as common sense. It's truthfully biblical sense.
Yeah, that's so interesting, Chad, because everything kind of circles back to the Bible, if you think about it. And
Amen.
One thing that people have to make a decision about in their lives is if there is one thing on this earth that we can know is true and real and right? Because that's a big question in our culture these days, is what can we believe in? What is authentic and genuine and real? What is the truth? There's so much information, misinformation floating around, and now we have artificial intelligence creating
Right.
some of it. Is really hard to pin down. But people of faith know, believers know, that the Bible is really pretty much the only thing that you can count on as absolute truth. And I think that is the decision that people have to make. Everything will come from that, stand on it, flow from it. Do you believe that the Bible is the word of God and is correct? And if you don't, I mean, that's a tough road to travel. What do you base your decisions, your opinions, your, ideologies on from there? You have to venture then into the world and that swirl of information versus misinformation. So it's really challenging. And the church, which has historically been the leading voice on all of these issues, has been weakened, but it's coming back. And I love to hear you talking about your interactions and your conversations with pastors and faith leaders, especially with minorities and people of color, because they are quite often some of the most passionate about their faith. So I love hearing your very boots on the ground with these folks in the churches, knowing what's going on. And if we are truly having this sifting and this revival, a lot of people are really grateful for it because the way things are going right now, I wouldn't say many people, and the polling and the data, will sustain this. People are not happy with what's going on. And speaking of that, I call you a campaign insider because presidential campaigns and gubernatorial campaigns, they love to come to you. They know that you're the guy that everybody knows and you've got the beat on what's happening. So we're in ooh, I don't want to call it circus-like. I think I called something circus-like the other day.
It's a swirl.
It's a swirl. We're in an unprecedented, truly, presidential election season. One of our candidates been sitting in a courtroom for the last few weeks, being brought up on criminal charges. The other one has a history and a life and a family with a lot of questionable things going on. Two platforms that almost could not be farther apart from each other, and people who don't feel represented. And I want to read you a couple of these. I love to work with just our most current data and our most current statistics, because I think it's really important to get your insight, knowing what you know and communicating with campaigns in this way and with all these faith leaders. You really have the thumb on the pulse here. But as we have talked about before, the top issues that matter to people who plan to vote in this presidential election this fall is different by generation, mostly just Gen Z. Any voters in Gen Z, which is going to just be 18 to 27-year-olds this year. Now, Gen Z is like 11 to 26, 27 right now, but a huge chunk of them, it's millions of voters. They have a little bit of a different viewpoint here. So I think that's important to talk about. But the latest, there was an ABC News Ipsos poll that has Trump support at 46% to Biden's 44%. And Trump's favorability is up even from there. Biden's approval rating right now as president is at 35%. That's very close to his historic low of about 33%. 43% of Americans say they're worse off financially, and 81% say Biden is too old to lead the country for another 4 years. And most adults, voting adults, top issues are the economy, inflation, crime and safety, protecting democracy, right? That's a loaded issue. Healthcare, immigration at the border, and it goes from there. And they're worried about election fraud, feeling unrepresented, which we just mentioned. And this is an interesting one. They're just worried about Donald Trump in general. That's just one of their election worries is Trump.
Yep.
Gen Z are younger voters who could swing it, by the way.
Yeah.
They are worried about their top issues. It was mental health, but
Mm.
at some point, Chad, the rubber hits the road. They're worried about inflation now too. It's not easy for them out there, and abortion. Abortion is really, we've talked about this. I'd love for you to speak to it as an issue. We've talked about it being the issue that will decide this election. And you have two sets of generations with very different thoughts and feelings about that. What do you think about the state of voters' thoughts and opinions right now?
You're right. The whole thing's a loaded question. I think there's a lot of swirl. There's a lot of confusion. There's a lot of clutter. And I tell you this story about an interview I gave to the Washington Post religion reporter just a couple weeks ago. I had a meeting at Family Research Council with Tony Perkins and some other of our friends, and this girl had called and said, "Like to talk to you about evangelicals and voting and Trump and all that." I said, "Sure, I'm happy to talk to you about anything." And I think this plays into what your question is, Kyle. So I go around the corner, and my son was with me on that trip, and he and I got a cup of coffee, and this young girl comes in, and she starts just building a relationship and kind of firing away. And, hey, you've been a state party chairman, you work for the party, now you want to C3, and you're with pastors, and give us your take on this. And I said, "Well, tell me first, and won't use her name, but I said, what's your faith background?" And she said, "Well, I was brought up in Northern California in a non-religious family." I said, "Oh." I said, "Begging your pardon, and I'm happy to answer any question you got, but let me ask you something. I've been told by your friends in the media for 25 years, I'm not a minority. I can't speak for minorities. I'm not a gay. I can't speak for gays. I'm not a woman. I can't speak for women. You don't even know what evangelicals believe in, but you're going to write an article and pontificate about evangelicals. I just want to know how you square that in your mind."
Hmm.
And of course, they're not used to getting asked questions. and,
Not
and
used
she
to
said,
getting
"Well,
called on the carpet?
yeah." She said, "Well, I never thought about that." I said,
Oh.
"Well, how would you fix it?" She said, "I'm not sure." I said, "Well, the way to start," I said, "Do you have an apps on your phone, a smartphone?" She said, "Yeah." I said, "There's a great Bible app called YouVersion, YOU version. And I do my readings out of it sometime. It has multiple Bible studies." I said, "I just challenge you, go download that app and start with the book of John. When you get through the entire book of John, you call me and I'll answer any question politically you want." So I say all that to say this, Kyle. The people who form most of the polling, and I've written polls, so we know how that goes. I watch trend lines in polls,
Mm-hmm.
not top lines.
Mm-hmm.
I watch crosstabs in polls, not the top lines that they report. But the trend lines tell us an awful lot about what's going on. But the people who write the polls and write the stories don't, as a general rule, don't share our foundational biblical worldview. But I'm telling you, they are massively, as you said before, bigly influential
Mm-hmm.
in
Mm-hmm.
people's forming their opinion and how they see things and how they make decisions. And so one thing that I taught my Sunday school class about, Christians and general pastors, is we need to be very careful about where we get information, because I think that goes to the heart of your question. What's going on out there? Look, for all of Trump's warts, he's been proven to be right in so many things.
Mm.
I think, and taking off Republican hat and Democrat hat and just looking at politically, both sides are in a little bit of a quandary.
Mm.
Both of them have high unfavorables. Clearly, the Democrats have put themselves in a box. I think if Kamala had been more qualified, she'd already be in a position of the presidency. I think that Democrat friends of mine who are in the consulting space have told me they're very nervous. Clearly, the president's not mentally or physically competent. It's scary. I don't think most people I talk to, no matter what age they are, believe that Biden is really in charge of anything.
Mm.
I think people are pretty convinced that there's a group of people that probably run him and, put him out there for limited periods of time. That little thing he did with accepting the debate challenge took 5 different clips
Right.
put together. It looked bad.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing I learned about politics, sitting in those rooms in the White House and the RNC and over 100 campaigns, is nothing is accidental. And I wish we could teach our people to understand somebody's pulling some strings. There is a man behind the curtain. Now, he's just like Oz. It ain't all that big and bad if you pull the curtain back.
Mm-hmm.
But there's somebody behind the curtain. And so a lot of the confusion you're talking about, whether it's culturally within the church, politically, I think that there's a sense, there's a movement of people. I believe corporate media is involved deeply. When you watch the montage of their talking points get repeated, it's like you're watching the Ron Burgundy movie,
Right, right.
Like, oh my goodness. So I think that's part of it. But I also think what's going on is, and I'll return to the words we've used, common sense. I was in Detroit with 12 pastors about 3 weeks ago. Two of them were black pastors. We had this very same conversation. I was in Florida. Like I said, about 25-30% of the room was minority pastors. Same conversation on Wednesday. After church Sunday, I'm going to Michigan and Wisconsin. We have 10 meetings in 4 days in those two states. And we're packing them in, trying to get out there, and I'll guarantee you we'll have this conversation. I think there's cluttering. I think there's a purposeful, intentional effort to confuse people. And so it's more important that we tell our people, get good information.
Yeah.
Your mom and I and you and Brad Dacus on the website, we put together reliable, conservative Christian media sources. And I would just encourage people, go dig into those things. Don't take my word for it, but go do your research.
Right.
People on Instagram or X or Twitter or whatever, and they take it as the gospel truth too much. And it's kind of like I told my Sunday school class the other day. I said, we got to be reading the Bible. We need to be in the Bible every single day and be rooted. And I said, I don't want to pick anybody. I don't want to put you on the spot, but why don't you read the Bible more? And the number one answer was, I don't have time. And so this is a few Sundays ago. We reiterated it Sunday. So I pulled out a Bible. And I picked out my daily reading that day from the 1 Year Bible app. And it has an Old Testament, a New Testament, a Psalm, and a proverb. And I purposefully, Kyle, I put it in one guy's hands. I went and grabbed it from his hands to put it in his wife's hands, took it to another lady's hands, then put it in her husband's hands. In other words, I made them transfer it just to take more time. And we timed it. We timed it.
Wow.
And one time it took 16 minutes and 11 seconds, I believe, to read. That's 4 chapters of the Bible.
Yeah.
Another time it took like 15 minutes and 22 seconds or some such. And I said, are y'all telling me you don't spend 15 or 16 or even 20 minutes a day wasting time in something that's less important than Bible reading?
Oh, Chad, let me tell you what people are wasting their time on, because I know.
Exactly.
The younger generations are
foundation stuff.
Yeah. 7.5 hours a day on average that younger generations are on a device.
It's awful.
You think about what that means in a day if you're in school. So how do you even get 7.5 hours on another device? It's mind blowing. And we have an attention span that is now, it's like less than 7 seconds, I want to say. We have less attention span than that of a goldfish. Did you know that?
Yeah, I read that, actually.
Yeah, it's just shocking,
Crazy.
Societal space that we're operating within right now. These kids are growing up in a digital age. They are obsessed. They're hooked. They're addicted to it. They're depressed. They are isolated. This is how you would treat a prisoner of war. You isolate them, you confuse them, you keep them focused on one thing, keep them in the dark, it's really shocking to see that we are doing this to an entire generation. And so, and I also, you guys can take this as a popular opinion or an unpopular opinion, but I think that what is going on is that as Americans, it has become almost taboo to be a Christian. It is not cool. It is not. It seems like you're a religious zealot. You're sort of a weird, I don't know, pilgrim Amish looking person walking with your Bible and covering your neck and your ankles. And it's just not the thing right now. The thing now is to, like you're saying, rely on yourself. Put yourself on the throne. Be whatever you want. Change it all the time. Rely only on yourself. Create whatever reality you want and operate within it. Don't operate within the rules of a society or a functioning government or a community. Do whatever you want. And it's totally fine. And if somebody calls you on that, you scream and cry to the mountaintops and sue. or throw soup on the Mona Lisa or sit in the middle of a freeway. It is weird times, but being a Christian and holding that line for people of faith is super unpopular right now. And this is why men and women of faith are getting the Christian nationalism label, which I do have to say, there have been some great labels assigned to groups, but this one, I think they need to go back to the drawing board. You know, it's like, okay, that people who love God and believe in God and love their country are not offended by this. They're not ashamed by that, and it's just kind of crazy that we have to fight. People have to fight to live out their faith in a nation that was built to allow them to do exactly that.
Yeah, there's a young guy in my Sunday school class, and he just got named deacon, I don't know, a few months ago or whatever. And when he gave his testimony, he said, I like what Mr. Chad says in Sunday school. I never don't think of myself as Mr. Chad, but anyway,
I like Mr. Chad.
I like what Mr. Chad says in Sunday school. Everybody turns 30. And, I do that joke you see me say when I speak that around 16 or 18, we got all the answers. We don't have any of the questions yet. We got all the answers. And as we get that job and marriage and house and bills and car payment and kids, we're like, oh my goodness, my dad and mom knew what they were talking about. They get smarter every single day.
Yeah.
And I think that there's a real sense of entitlement that's been foisted upon the young people, and you owe me. We've rewarded temper tantrums. I think the devices are a big part about it. I have a close friend that I've mentored who's actually in a state legislature who said, man, I'm losing my kids to devices. And I said, take them away, reward them with them. You pay the bill, cut it off. What do they do with their time? I said, maybe they'll go outside and kick a soccer ball, throw a baseball, throw a ball to a dog, but you got to get them off the devices. They got to find some other purpose and meaning in life other than having a dulling of their senses by looking at devices for hours of the day. So I think all this plays, Kyle, but I think that's what I love about your ministry and you're talking to the younger generation. Look, we all have a selfishness. All sin begins in self, right? Me. Take care of me first. And certainly getting married, have children, all those things make you a lot more responsible. But right now we're rewarding temper tantrums. We watch these campus protests. They get exalted to do their thing, and they get rewarded, sometimes even get money. They get applauded, and we have to stop doing those things. We tell people the truth and to teach them to stand on the truth and to teach them to check it out. And I think that what the young man was saying in my Sunday school class is the older we get, the more we realize there's something else out there I've got to figure out. And I need to find out what that is. I think our responsibility as adults, you're a mom, you've got your own organization and you're out talking in this kind of ministry setting. You and I have a responsibility to them to bring them along and say, look, been there, done that.
Right.
I've been through that stuff. Let me help you. And we just got to be there. And that's biblical, too, that we bring them along.
Yeah. No, you bring up a really good point, Chad, too, in that, we've lived through some really hard things. You have lived through tremendously hard things. People will look at you, and I get this sometimes, too. They look at you and they think, oh, my gosh, this Chad Connelly is just the nicest, sweetest, happiest, jolliest man. And it's interesting to see people make those judgments about, well, what does he know? Look how secure and happy he is. He's never gone through anything tough in his life, and they can pick on you for it. They think you don't know, but your credibility is in that you have gone through those hard things, and you know what a good life is and what leads you to a good life. And that's what I love, our younger generations, and want the best for them, which is why I'm doing all of this. But it's because, we've all been there, but it's easy to forget once you get past. It's easy to forget what it feels like and what it's like to be questioning or to maybe not be respected yet by society. And I'm seeing this younger generation, Gen Z, and A is right behind them. Let me tell you, they are growing up fast. They're smart, they are passionate, they want to make an impact and affect change, I mean, they'll do it. They're just not sure which direction to point in.
That's right.
And we know what gets you that good life, what gets you to that place of accomplishing your goals and feeling good about doing it and making the right kind of change. And then this is where, again, our churches step in, because we're seeing the ramifications, right, of this digital dependency, in these higher suicide rates, higher depression rates, everything that we just covered. And we're just now on the back end of it and getting all of the data and the numbers from it. So it is our responsibility to say, hey, that's not going well. We have to do something about it. We've got to pull our kids out of this. And where are they going to go, right? We're realizing that schools are getting sorted out. They're having a struggle with curriculum and ideologies that have been being shared, and maybe parents weren't aware of them. But it's got to be the church, right? Like this church that was such a strong influence and powerful voice in everyone's lives up until not that long ago. And like, I love that Candace Owens, I don't always agree with everything Candace Owens says, but she did say one thing that I loved, and she's trying to bring back this saying, it's hip to be square, right? Like,
I heard that.
Because it produces a good, happy life. You feel good. And you can see that she's living that. Like, she's doing great. Her life is fantastic, right? And then I think that we need to get back to that place of helping these kids find their way to their best life possible.
And you said it right. It's really a lot to do with perspective. And I say a lot of times when I speak that one of the hardest things for humans to do, I see this side of the podium and y'all see the other side. One of the hardest things for us to do is go around and see the other perspective. Mm-hmm. And when we're 20, 18, 25, even 30, sometimes 40, we don't have much perspective. And as you go along in life, and you mentioned my story, I remember speaking in Australia in 1996. With my first wife who passed away 10 years later. And the guy said, "You guys were fantastic. I can't wait to hear you speak after God's allowed you to be broken."
Oh.
I was like, "Well, what do you mean? I don't want to be broken. What are you talking about, Peter?" And my wife, Michelle, said, "Broken? What do you mean broken?" And little did I know that almost 10 years to the day he said that, she took her own life. Mm-hmm. And I didn't have that person, and I wouldn't wish that kind of thing on anybody, any circumstances. But it mellows, and it does make you realize I don't have the answers. Mm-hmm. I told the boys just a few months ago, my two boys, I thought I could keep her here, and I couldn't.
Yeah,
I couldn't. But it mellows you, and it gives you a side of perspective to just back off and realize God's God. Mm-hmm. Romans 8:28, we know all things work together for good of those that love the Lord and are called according to his purpose, is true. We don't have to understand the eternal things. We'll find out one day. But it also makes us deepen our faith walk, and it makes us deepen our desire to figure out this thing called life. I had a mentor who said, you need to find a mentor in every part of your life. And Kyle, when Michelle died, I went to see him. And I said, and I was speaking, and he was just a huge, huge mentor. He's in heaven now. And I said, Mr. Bill, I can't do it. I can't. I can't. Here I was trying to encourage people and speak about goal setting in life. I said, I can't do it. He said, Chad, you see that Bible on my desk? Yes, sir. He said, open that up to Luke 9:62. Okay. And of course, you know what it says. And no man, having put his hand to the plow and looking back, is fit for the kingdom of God. Mm-hmm. I read it to myself. And he said, read that out loud. I kind of mumbled it. And no man, put his hand to the plow, looking back, is fit for the kingdom. And he said, no, read it louder. You need to hear it more than I do, son. And he said, and I read it again. He said, what's that mean? I said, Mr. Bill, it means I can't quit. He said, you doggone right. Yeah. And so as hard as that was, we can't be quitters. We got to find God's purpose in our lives. And I think when we're young, if we can just seek out the people who've done it well and done it right, hip to be square, find out what they've done that's worked. And of course, even the definition of success is under debate by some of the people that pass off as experts these days.
Right. Sure is.
We want to dig into what does success look like for
Mm-hmm.
me, and I want to go find that person and hang out with them. I love the story that Aristotle Onassis told. I watched a video of him some years ago, and somebody said, "Mr. Onassis, you're one of the world's richest men. You're a multi-billionaire. If you lost everything, what would you do?" He said, "Well, I'd move to a town, and I would get me a job, and I would flip hamburgers. I would sweep floors. I would
Yeah.
clean out trash cans, whatever it took, and I'd save up enough money to buy me a nice suit of clothes and a nice belt and a good pair of shoes, get me a nice haircut, finally find a place to live that was cheap, and I'd want to take the richest man in town to dinner and pay for his dinner." And the
Hmm.
newspaper reporter said, "What? Why would you do that?" He said, "The crumbs from a successful man's table are better than a feast with an idiot." And let's face it, there are a lot of people feasting with idiots these days instead of seeking out success. And
Absolutely. Mm.
I've tried to live that life. And
Mm.
that's why I told you when you said, "Would you do the show?" I said, "Kyle, for you and the Lindsays, over broken glass backwards on
Oh,
my
I know.
belly 1,000 miles to do whatever y'all need me to do and to serve you because
Mm.
you're the kind of people I want to be around."
Well, you do have that servant's heart, Chad. And, for what that mentor meant to you in that part of your life, you have done for me when God let me break. So I thank you for that, and for how effective you have been in this space for all of these years. People don't realize, but you have delivered votes, and you have delivered some of the most important votes in our nation's history. I'm going to say that because and you've done it by doing the hard work, flipping burgers and sweeping floors, right? That's what you have to do. You have to dig in and start where you start, and it's one at a time. It's not a one size fits all approach, and I think that's why you have been so successful, is that you have understood that it is a one-to-one relationship. That's how God's used your gifts that he gave you, is that you are able to connect and relate to people. And speaking of fulfilling our purpose and our vocation, this is I want to switch over to, every show I've got a politically extra moment that's a current event that's just happened, where here at Politically Basic, we just cover the basics, but sometimes people get pretty extra in our world. I think, not in purposefully doing so, but the Kansas City Chiefs kicker, Harrison Butker, just delivered the commencement speech to end all commencement speeches. Apparently, no one is ever allowed to
Yeah.
to speak at a religious school ever again. He was at his alma mater, Benedictine College in Kansas. Now, this is a man of the Catholic faith giving a commencement speech to a group of Catholic students, Catholic graduates, at a Catholic school, talking about Catholicism. And it has gone viral. And the reason that it went viral is that he shared, in his own words and his own terminology, and maybe you can make the argument that that didn't land exactly right in that time and space and to that particular audience. But he said, ladies, I'm sure you're so glad to be, getting your diploma, and you've worked so hard, but I'm sure you're also really excited to live out part of your purpose and your vocation of being wives and mothers. And he also said, men, don't be afraid to live boldly in a masculine way, be masculine men. Well, people took offense to the hills. How dare he? And it's really kicked off an interesting conversation. I did so many videos on this today, actually, for socials, that my socials person was like, you gotta stop. Like, it's too much, because Chad, I have a lot to say on this topic as a woman who has degrees and is a full-time mama and works full-time. I mean, I can come at this topic 17 different ways, and I have too much to say on it. But again, talking about, the religious persecution of Christians, and Catholicism falls under that umbrella as we categorize it here in this nation. What do you think is so upsetting to people right now about people of faith expressing traditional values and traditional male and female husband and wife roles?
And it's something, I believe it goes back to truth reveals and exposes error, and error hates truth. So error will always seek to suppress and hide and lie about truth because error can't even take competition. This whole cancel culture thing is going to come snapping back on the people who've done it. You've probably seen the Bill Maher interviews. He's sick of cancel culture. The comedians who can't even have comedian hours and shows because they're going to offend everybody. It's going to come snapping back. And we're going to get back to a time when truth is exalted and people go, yeah, what a great thought that is. How edifying of his wife he was. Because that's what he was doing. He was honoring his wife. And I've never spent a dime on NFL merchandise. The whole kneeling thing ended it for me. But boy, if I were an NFL fan, I'd be buying Harrison's shirts and jerseys. And I've even heard, I think it was you and I were talking about it, his shirts and jerseys are sold out, which is a great testimony to the silent majority that's underlying watching all this going, this is not right. I like what he's saying, and I'm going to like it so much. I'm going to support it and buy these, what are they, $200 jerseys or whatever, NFL authentic, that you and I wouldn't spend that much money on. But I think we ought to go back to edifying truth and not apologizing for it. I applaud him. I retweeted it several times yesterday and today because I thought people need to see, do not be ashamed. We're unapologetic. We're for the gospel, but we're unapologetic for truth. I think there's an assault on truth, and it is because truth exposes error. Error can't handle truth. It can't handle competition.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. You're going to look great in that jersey if you can get one. I heard all the lady sizes. My producer just told us all the lady sizes went first. It's interesting. We're hungry to see people stand up for what's real and what's true. And it just kind of is so shocking. I know I say that a lot. It's so shocking, but it is. It's like, is it okay for me to be a woman who's happy to be a woman? Is it okay for me to I need to work and I love to work. Is it okay for me to also wish that I had the time and ability to be a stay-at-home mom? Did you know that a stay-at-home mom, if they've done the equivalency, if stay-at-home mom were a salaried job, and they've equated it to a job that would make $185,000 a year. It is no joke. It is so hard, and we discount it, in our culture. It's ridiculous. So my take is, women don't always enjoy it when a man tells us what we should be excited about. Okay, I'm just going to give him that little criticism. I think that's part of what didn't land was that, you can be right all day long, but sometimes us ladies, we're just not going to accept it if it's coming from a man that has to do with women's issues. So, but his intention was right in that it is so special to be a woman. I think, again, maybe unpopular opinion, that's why so many people want to be women is because it's incredible. Being a woman is phenomenal. And we should be honoring and respecting that special uniqueness about women. And sure, we can go into the workforce, but being a mama is just the most important job in the whole world. I think that's what he was trying to communicate. Like, you know what? You worked hard for this degree. You go out in that world and you conquer it. But also, it's okay to be excited about your special, unique role as a mother. So I just thought, I think the reaction, you're right, the reaction to what he said has been much more interesting to the words than the words he actually said. So we'll see if that's an educational moment for us culturally.
Right. When I lost my wife and met Dana, and of course, Dana, and we got married, she brought two little girls. I had two little boys. We had 4 kids under 10 who'd all lost a parent to suicide. And I got a front row seat to watching how awesome my wife is. But I also got an experience of that time being single, Kyle, and it's just hard. And I found out I wasn't wired to be a woman. I could not fulfill motherhood duties for my boys. And I cried in desperation. I know you relate to this. God help me, show me the path. I can't do this. And so I think he was trying to edify how awesome his wife is and how much he appreciates her,
Yeah.
and what a fulfillment it is to see God's plan come together. And I'm telling you, when I introduced the boys to Dana and she introduced the girls to me, it was just glorious. When we went on our first date, we put the kids together, and Dana said this could work. And then we went on the honeymoon, and we called, the girls were staying with her parents, the boys were staying with my parents. We called the girls first. And Leah, you've been around my daughter Leah, she's now an occupational therapist. She's 25 in a month and a half. Leah got on the phone as a 7-year-old whose dad had taken his life. And she desperately wanted a daddy. And she prayed about her daddy in heaven, but she wanted a daddy on earth. And on the honeymoon, when we called Leah and Summer at Dana's parents, Leah said, "When can I start calling you daddy?
Oh,
When can I start calling you daddy?"
why are we going to cry on this
right
show,
now,
Chad?
sweetheart, right now. And so
That is so beautiful.
yes, it's beautiful.
Yeah.
And I watch my boys cling to Dana and the girls cling to me, and God's plan.
No, it's the ideal, and that is what we should strive for. And there's this insertion and this push to chuck the ideal and just say, well, since not everyone can have that, or maybe we just want to go rogue and go a different way, and we're trying to push other things into that space, and it's not working, and it's bearing bad fruit. And so we should keep our eyes on the ideal and fulfill what we were made and built to do. It has the good outcome, and that is so sweet and so precious. And you're just a walking, talking example of, God's grace and how he takes broken situations and works them for our good and his glory. And you are working, fulfilling his will for your life every day. And it's just awesome. So I knew that this was going to be a problem, that we're just going to talk endlessly, but I also know that you have been very generous with your time, and I'm going to have you back. I love talking on these topics with you, Chad, especially in a presidential election year. I always say I love nothing more than a presidential election. It is just, I love to talk about it. I love to speculate on it. I want to dig into all the details. And we have some really important milestones coming up with the convention and voter registration. But I want to wrap up and ask you one final question. And it's a big one, but I also often think it's the most important thing that I can ask each one of my guests. And it is, what do you wish that people knew about, with your expertise, your tremendous experience, your incredible success that you've had? What is the one thing that you would tell the politically basic audience and listeners that you wish they knew that most people don't know?
Get informed. Jesus is not running. We're never going to have a
Darn
candidate. Yeah, exactly. Line up get to know them best you can. Learn about them. You get informed yourself and decide where your values lie and how do I match up those values with the people who are running. And I don't just mean president or governor or senator or congresswoman. I mean city council, school board. We need to have more people that reflect biblical values at every level. And so politically speaking, I believe is also a cultural nod, and that is find out what the people stand for, what they really, really stand for, that are going to represent you in whatever office they're in. That's what I love to tell people politically, Kyle. I think we got to get back to a time where we see that it's our responsibility to get informed about the people who represent us.
Yeah, it's harder to do that now. I love that you're saying that. It's harder to do. The candidates tend now, especially this year, I'm really noticing, to be extra vague about where they stand, especially on some of these hot topics. Like we're seeing it with the topic of abortion right now. Nobody wants to be pinned down. And so asking directly. And I would even venture to say, just go directly to your pastor and ask your pastor. Every political issue is a biblical issue. And we're
Amen.
still a little hesitant to talk about it openly in church, but that's changing. That's shifting thanks in big part to the work that you're doing. These are biblical issues, and we need to hear from our faith leaders and from our pastors, from our church, what they say, what the Bible says about all of these issues.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's exactly right. If we take that responsibility to find out what the Bible says and line them up, our nation's going to be fine.
Yeah. I love that. I love ending on that hopeful note, Chad. You're just the best. I love you, and I'm thankful for you. Thank you for giving me this time and giving our listeners your wisdom. You just have such a wealth of it, and we're so thankful to you. So I hope you'll come back again, and we can keep talking.
Just tell me what you're doing and when I'm invited. Girl.
You're always invited.
Hey, love you a bunch.
You're always invited. Well, thank you guys so much for joining us on this episode of Politically Basic. Church and religion and faith has been the grounding and founding tenet of the United States of America since its beginning. And it's a pervasive and most influential factor now as we move further into this time of revival and consider voting in the most consequential election of our time. So thanks again to Chad Connelly for joining me. Make sure you check out their website. We'll have it on our website, politicallybasic.com. But Chad, it's ourfaithwins.org, yes? All right. Make sure you go check out what they're doing, and make sure you're following us at Politically Basic, and wait for those new episodes dropping at politicallybasic.com. Thank you guys so much for joining us, and can't wait to see you next time.